The late afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows of the Riverside Community Theater, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floors. The old building, once the pride of this small Pennsylvania town, now showed its age in every creaking board and faded velvet seat. The paint peeled from the walls like memories slowly fading, and the air carried the scent of decades of dreams, both fulfilled and abandoned. Nicolas Cage pushed through the heavy oak doors, the sound echoing through the empty lobby. He wasn't supposed to be here. His flight to Los Angeles had been delayed, and rather than spending another 3 hours in the sterile airport lounge, he decided to take a walk through the town where he'd be filming next month. The theater's marquee had caught his eye. Spring auditions, all welcome, and something about the weathered letters had drawn him in. He'd been in this business for over 4 decades now. He'd seen every type of performer, from the polished professionals of Hollywood to the eager amateurs of community theater. But there was something about these smaller venues that still moved him, something authentic that the glittering stages of Los Angeles sometimes lacked. Here, people perform not for fame or fortune, but for the pure love of storytelling. As he stepped into the main theater, Nicolas heard a voice from the stage. A young voice, trembling with nervousness but carrying something deeper, a raw honesty that made him pause in the shadows of the back row. To be or not to be, that is the question. The voice belonged to a boy, perhaps 16 years old, standing alone on the stage under a single spotlight. He was thin, almost fragile-looking, wearing clothes that had seen better days, jeans with carefully mended holes and a flannel shirt that was clean but clearly secondhand. His dark hair fell across his eyes as he spoke, and his hand shook slightly as he held an invisible skull. Nicolas found himself drawn forward, settling quietly into a seat in the middle of the theater. The boy continued with Hamlet's soliloquy, and while his delivery wasn't perfect, his voice cracked once, and he stumbled over a line. There was something electric about his performance. He wasn't just reciting words, he was living them. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against a sea of troubles, ... The words hung in the air, and Nicolas felt a chill run down his spine. This kid understood the weight of those words in a way that many seasoned actors never would. There was pain in his voice, real pain, the kind that comes from having faced some of those slings and arrows himself. From the wings, a woman emerged, probably in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and wearing a sweater that had seen many seasons. She carried a clipboard and had the harried look of someone trying to manage a production on a shoestring budget. "Thank you, Marcus," she called out as the boy finished. "That was ... very nice, dear. We'll let you know." The dismissive tone in her voice made Nicolas's jaw tighten. He'd heard that tone before, the polite brush-off given to those deemed not quite right for a role. But this woman was wrong, dead wrong. Marcus nodded, his shoulders sagging slightly as the weight of another rejection settled on them. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. I really appreciate the opportunity." His voice was steady, polite, but Nicolas could see the disappointment flickering across the boy's face like a candle being snuffed out. Marcus gathered his backpack, an old thing with patches sewn over holes, and began to walk toward the exit. "Wait," Nicolas called out, rising from his seat. Both Marcus and Mrs. Patterson turned, surprise written across their faces as they recognized the figure emerging from the shadows of the theater. Mrs. Patterson's clipboard clattered to the floor. "Mr. Cage? What are you ... I mean, how did you ... she stammered. Nicolas ignored her for the moment, his attention focused entirely on the boy standing on the stage. Marcus's eyes were wide with disbelief, and his hand gripped the strap of his backpack so tightly his knuckles had turned white. "That was beautiful," Nicolas said simply, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet theater. "Really beautiful." A flush of color rose in Marcus's cheeks. "Thank you, sir. I mean, Mr. Cage. I mean ... He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Thank you." Nicholas walked down the aisle toward the stage, his footsteps echoing in the silence. "How long have you been acting?" "Since I was 8, Marcus replied, his voice growing stronger. "My mom used to take me to the children's theater downtown. I did my first play there. I was a tree in A Midsummer Night's Dream." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "I didn't have any lines, but I loved being part of it." "And you've been auditioning here?" Nicholas glanced at Mrs. Patterson, who was still standing frozen with her mouth slightly open. "For 3 years," Marcus nodded. "I try out for everything, but—" He shrugged, the gesture carrying the weight of repeated disappointments. "Mrs. Patterson's right to look for someone else. The leads always go to kids whose parents can afford acting classes and voice lessons. I understand." There was no bitterness in his voice, just a weary acceptance that broke Nicholas's heart. He'd seen too many talented people give up because they couldn't afford the training or didn't have the connections. It was one of the things that bothered him most about this business. "Mrs. Patterson," Nicholas turned to the director, who had finally recovered enough to close her mouth. "What role was Marcus auditioning for?" "Hamlet," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But we usually cast older students, and there are several boys who've been in our program for years." "Boys who've been in your program for years," Nicholas repeated slowly. "And how did they do with that soliloquy?" Mrs. Patterson's silence was answer enough. Nicholas turned back to Marcus, who was watching the exchange with a mixture of hope and wariness. "Tell me about yourself, Marcus. What's your full name?" "Marcus Chun," the boy replied. "My mom works 2 jobs. She's a nurse at the hospital during the day and cleans offices at night. It's just the 2 of us. My dad—" He paused, and Nicholas saw pain flicker across his face. "He left when I was 10. Said acting was a waste of time and money we didn't have." Nicholas felt his chest tighten. How many stories like this had he heard over the years? How many talented people had he met who never got their chance because of circumstances beyond their control? "Your mother sounds like an incredible woman," Nicholas said quietly. "Working 2 jobs to support you both, that takes real strength." Marcus's face softened. "She is. She never misses a school play, even when she's exhausted. She sits in the back row and pretends she's not crying, but I can always tell." His voice wavered slightly. "She says she's proud of me, but I know she worries about my future. Acting doesn't exactly pay the bills." Mrs. Patterson cleared her throat awkwardly. "Mr. Cage, I don't want to interrupt, but we do have other auditions scheduled." Nicholas held up a hand without taking his eyes off Marcus. "What do you do when you're not in school or here at the theater?" "I work at Murphy's Hardware after school and on weekends," Marcus said. "Mr. Murphy is understanding about rehearsals and stuff. He lets me switch shifts when I need to." He paused, then added with quiet pride, "I'm saving up for college. Mom thinks I should study business or something practical, but I'm hoping maybe I can double major, business and theater. That way I have a backup plan, but I don't have to give up acting completely." The pragmatism in his voice struck Nicholas deeply. Here was a 16-year-old boy who understood sacrifice, who was already planning for a future where his dreams might have to take a backseat to survival. It reminded Nicholas of his own early struggles, though his circumstances had been different. "Mrs. Patterson," Nicholas said, turning back to the director, "I'd like to make a proposition." The woman blinked rapidly, still seeming to struggle with the surreal nature of the situation. "A proposition?" "I'll be in town for the next 6 weeks filming. I'd like to work with Marcus, coach him privately for this role." Nicholas saw the woman's eyes widen and Marcus's sharp intake of breath. "In exchange, you give him a fair shot at Hamlet. Not a guarantee, but a real audition where he's judged purely on his merit." "Mr. Cage, Mrs. Patterson stammered. "I'm not asking you to compromise your artistic integrity," Nicholas continued. "If, after 6 weeks of coaching, Marcus auditions and isn't the best choice for the role, then cast whoever is. But I think you might be surprised by what he can do with the right guidance." Marcus stepped forward, his voice barely controlled. "Mr. Cage, I can't. I mean, my mom and we couldn't possibly pay you for coaching." Nicholas smiled, the first real smile he'd shown since entering the theater. "Marcus, let me tell you something about this business. I've been incredibly fortunate in my career, more fortunate than I probably deserve. And with that fortune comes a responsibility to help the next generation of actors find their way. Consider this my investment in the future of theater." He paused, looking directly into the boy's eyes. "Besides, I have a feeling I might learn as much from you as you do from me. You have something that can't be taught. You have truth in your performance. Everything else is just technique." Tears welled up in Marcus's eyes, and he wiped them away quickly with the back of his hand. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Nicholas replied simply. "Say you're willing to work harder than you've ever worked before. Say you're ready to discover what you're truly capable of." "Yes," Marcus whispered, then louder, "Yes, sir, I'm ready." Mrs. Patterson looked between them, clearly overwhelmed by the turn of events. "Well, if Mr. Cage is willing to donate his time, I suppose we could postpone the final casting decision for 6 weeks." "Thank you," Marcus said, turning to her with genuine gratitude. "Thank you for giving me this chance." As the three of them worked out the details, when and where they would meet, what materials Marcus would need, Nicholas found himself genuinely excited about the project. It had been too long since he'd felt this kind of anticipation about acting, this sense of discovery and possibility. After Mrs. Patterson left to prepare for the next audition, Nicholas and Marcus stood alone on the stage. The late afternoon light had faded, and the theater felt intimate and sacred in the gathering dusk. "Mr. Cage," Marcus said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why are you doing this?" "I mean, really. You don't know me, and you could spend your time here doing anything. Why invest in some random kid from nowhere?" Nicholas was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully. "Do you know what I remember most about my early career? It wasn't the first time I saw my name on a movie poster, or my first review, or even my first paycheck. It was the people who believed in me before I believed in myself." He walked to the edge of the stage and looked out at the empty seats. "There was a director named Francis Ford Coppola who took a chance on me when I was not much older than you. He saw something in me that I wasn't even sure was there. And there have been others along the way, teachers, fellow actors, even crew members who went out of their way to help me grow." Nicholas turned back to Marcus. "I can't repay those people for what they gave me. Most of them are gone now, or we've lost touch. But I can pay it forward. And when I watched you up there today, speaking Hamlet's words like they were your own thoughts, I saw that same spark that someone once saw in me." Marcus nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of this responsibility. "I won't let you down." "You couldn't," Nicholas replied. "Not if you stay true to what I saw up there today. The only way you could disappoint me is if you tried to be someone you're not." They spent the next hour talking about the play, about Hamlet as a character, about the difference between performing and being. Nicholas found himself impressed not just by Marcus's natural talent, but by his thoughtfulness, his genuine curiosity about the craft of acting. "I should probably get home," Marcus said eventually, glancing at the clock on the theater wall. "Mom gets worried if I'm too late, especially when she doesn't know where I am." "Of course. Can I give you a ride?" Marcus hesitated, then shook his head. "Thank you, but I have my bike. It's not far, and—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I think I need some time to process all of this. It feels like a dream, you know?" Nicholas smiled. "I understand. But Marcus, this is real. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, we start work. Are you ready for that?" "More ready than I've ever been for anything in my life." As Marcus gathered his things and headed for the exit, Nicholas called after him. "Marcus?" The boy turned back. "Bring your copy of Hamlet tomorrow. I want to see what notes you've made in the margins. Those are often more important than any formal training." Marcus's face lit up. "Yes, sir. Thank you again, Mr. Cage, for everything." After the boy left, Nicolas remained in the theater for several minutes, standing alone on the stage where he'd witnessed something remarkable. He pulled out his phone to call his assistant to let her know he'd be staying in town longer than planned to rearrange his schedule for the next 6 weeks. But first, he simply stood there in the gathering darkness, remembering what it felt like to be young and hungry and desperate to prove himself. He thought about the path that had brought him to this moment, all the roles, the successes, the failures, the lessons learned along the way. And he thought about Marcus cycling home through the quiet streets of this small town, probably still not quite believing that his life had just changed forever. The next morning, Nicolas arrived at the theater early. He'd spent the previous evening rereading Hamlet, making notes about different approaches to the character, thinking about how to help Marcus find his own interpretation rather than simply copying what others had done before. Marcus was already there, sitting in the front row with his worn paperback copy of the play open on his lap. He looked up as Nicolas entered, and the excitement in his eyes was tempered by a nervousness that was entirely natural. "Good morning," Nicolas said, settling into the seat beside him. "How did you sleep?" "Not much," Marcus admitted with a sheepish grin. "I kept thinking I was going to wake up and find out it was all a dream. Plus, I stayed up reading about your career. I wanted to understand who was going to be teaching me." "And what did you discover?" "That you've never been afraid to take risks," Marcus said thoughtfully. "Every role I read about, it seemed like you were always looking for something different, something challenging. You could have played it safe, but you didn't." Nicolas was impressed by the boy's insight. "That's true. And sometimes those risks didn't pay off. I've made some movies that, well, let's just say they weren't my finest moments. But I learned something from each one." "What's the most important thing you learned?" The question was simple, but it made Nicolas pause. After a moment, he answered that authenticity is more important than perfection. Audiences can forgive technical mistakes, but they can't forgive dishonesty. When you're on stage or in front of a camera, you have to be willing to be vulnerable, to let people see the real you through the character you're playing. Marcus nodded, absorbing this wisdom. "Is that what you saw yesterday?" "When I was doing the soliloquy?" "Exactly that. You weren't trying to impress anyone with fancy technique. You were just being honest about what those words meant to you." Nicolas opened his own copy of the play. "Now let's dig deeper. Tell me about your Hamlet." "Not Shakespeare's Hamlet, not Laurence Olivier's Hamlet, not Kenneth Branagh's Hamlet. Your Hamlet. Who is he?" For the next 2 hours, they worked through the character, exploring Hamlet's motivations, his relationships, his internal conflicts. Nicolas was struck by how naturally Marcus grasped the psychological complexity of the role. The boy had an intuitive understanding of loss and disappointment that informed his interpretation in ways that formal training might have actually hindered. "Let's try the to be or not to be soliloquy again," Nicolas said. "But this time, I want you to forget about the audience entirely. You're alone in your room at night, and these thoughts are keeping you awake. You're not performing for anyone. You're just trying to work through the most important decision of your life." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself. When he began to speak, his voice was quieter, more intimate. The words weren't being projected to the back row. They were being whispered to the darkness. To be or not to be, that is the question. As he continued, Nicolas felt that same chill he'd experienced the day before, but now it was deeper, more profound. Marcus had taken his direction and made it his own, finding a vulnerability in the famous speech that was heartbreaking in its honesty. When he finished, the theater was silent for a long moment. "How did that feel?" Nicolas asked. "Different," Marcus said thoughtfully. "Scarier but more real, like I was actually considering ... Well, what Hamlet is considering. That's the difference between acting and being. You were being Hamlet just then, not acting like him." Nicolas stood up, pacing slightly as he often did when he was excited about a discovery. "We're going to spend the next 6 weeks finding that level of truth in every scene, every line." They worked together every morning for the next 3 weeks. Nicholas was amazed by Marcus's dedication. The boy would arrive early, stay late, and clearly spend his evenings studying and preparing. His copy of Hamlet became increasingly dog-eared, filled with notes and insights. But it wasn't just Marcus's talent that impressed Nicholas, it was his character. Despite the intensity of their work together, Marcus never lost sight of his responsibilities to his mother, his job at the hardware store, or his schoolwork. He approached everything with the same quiet determination and integrity. During their third week together, Nicholas decided to attend one of Marcus's shifts at Murphy's Hardware. He wanted to see the boy in his everyday environment, to understand more about the life that had shaped his perspective. The store was exactly what Nicholas had expected. A small-town hardware store that had been serving the community for decades. The aisles were narrow and packed with everything from screws and nails to garden hoses and paint cans. The wooden floors creaked underfoot, and the air smelled of machine oil and sawdust. Marcus was behind the counter, helping an elderly woman find the right type of light bulb for her kitchen fixture. His patience and kindness were evident as he asked questions about her needs and walked her through the different options. "Now, Mrs. Henderson," Marcus was saying, "this LED bulb is going to last you 10 times longer than those incandescent ones you've been using. Yes, it costs a bit more upfront, but you'll save money in the long run." The woman patted his hand affectionately. "You're such a good boy, Marcus. Your mother raised you right." As Mrs. Henderson left with her light bulb, Marcus noticed Nicholas browsing in the paint section. A look of surprise crossed his face, followed quickly by embarrassment. "Mr. Cage, what are you doing here?" "Just wanted to see where you spend your afternoons," Nicholas replied, walking over to the counter. "That was nice. What you did with Mrs. Henderson, you could have sold her the cheaper bulb and made the sale easier. But you gave her advice that was actually in her best interest." Marcus shrugged, seeming uncomfortable with the praise. "Mr. Murphy always says we're not just selling products, we're helping neighbors. Mrs. Henderson's been coming here since I was little. She used to give me candy when Mom brought me in with her." An older man emerged from the back of the store, wiping his hands on a rag. He was probably in his 60s, with gray hair and the calloused hands of someone who'd spent his life working with tools. "Marcus, is this the fellow you've been telling me about?" the man asked, extending his hand to Nicholas. "Tom Murphy. I own this place. Nicholas Cage, it's a pleasure to meet you." Tom's handshake was firm and honest. "Marcus here's been walking on air for the past few weeks. Haven't seen him this excited about anything since ... well, ever. Really. He's an exceptional young man," Nicholas said. "You're lucky to have him working for you." "Luckiest day of my business career was when his mother asked if I had any part-time work for him," Tom replied. "Most kids his age, you have to watch them every minute. Marcus, I trust him with the register, the keys, everything. He's got integrity." Nicholas glanced at Marcus, who was clearly embarrassed by all the praise. "That's a rare quality at any age. His mother did right by him," Tom continued. "That woman works herself to the bone to give that boy opportunities. When Marcus told me about this acting thing you two are doing, I said to my wife, finally, someone's recognizing what we've known all along. This kid's special." Over the next hour, Nicholas watched Marcus interact with customers, handle inventory, and manage the store with a competence that was remarkable for someone his age. He saw how the regular customers genuinely cared about the boy, how they asked about school and his mother and his plans for the future. This was Marcus's community, the people who had watched him grow up, who had supported him and his mother through difficult times. Nicholas understood now why the boy's performances had such honesty. His life was grounded in real relationships and genuine human connection. That evening, Nicholas asked Marcus if he could meet his mother. They had been working together for 3 weeks, and he felt it was important to speak with her directly about her son's future. "She gets home around 8, Marcus said. "She'd love to meet you, but she'd probably be exhausted. And our apartment isn't. I mean, it's not very fancy. "Marcus," Nicholas said gently, "I don't care about fancy. I care about meeting the woman who raised such an exceptional son." They arrived at the small apartment complex just as Lin Chen was climbing the stairs to the second floor. She was a petite woman in her early 40s, wearing scrubs and carrying a bag that probably contained her cleaning supplies for her night job. Even from a distance, Nicholas could see the exhaustion in her posture. "Mom," Marcus called out, jogging up the stairs ahead of Nicholas. "There's someone I'd like you to meet." Lin turned, and Nicholas saw where Marcus had gotten his expressive eyes. Despite her tiredness, her face lit up when she saw her son. "Marcus, sweetheart, you're home early. Did everything go well at the theater today?" "Better than well," Marcus said, his excitement bubbling over. "Mom, this is Nicolas Cage. Mr. Cage, this is my mother, Lin." For a moment, Lin simply stared, processing the introduction. Then she looked at her son, at Nicholas, and back at her son again. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "Did you just say Nicolas Cage? The actor?" "Yes, ma'am," Nicholas replied, stepping forward with a warm smile. "And I have to say, Mrs. Chun, you have raised an absolutely remarkable young man." Lin looked down at her scrubs, suddenly self-conscious. "Oh goodness, I must look terrible. I've been at the hospital all day, and I still have to—" "You look like a woman who works hard to take care of her family," Nicholas interrupted gently. "There's nothing more beautiful than that." Tears welled up in Lin's eyes, and she pressed a hand to her mouth. "Marcus told me what you've been doing for him. I don't understand why, but I can't tell you how grateful." "Mrs. Chun, may I tell you what I see when I watch your son perform? I see someone who understands sacrifice, who knows what it means to work for something, who has been taught the value of treating people with kindness and respect. That doesn't come from acting classes, that comes from being raised by someone who lives those values every day." Lin unlocked the apartment door with shaking hands, and they followed her inside. The space was small but spotlessly clean, decorated with Marcus's school photos and certificates from various academic achievements. There was a small shelf of books, mostly classics that Marcus had collected from used bookstores and library sales. "Please, sit down," Lin said, gesturing to the modest couch. "Can I get you something to drink? I don't have much, but—" "I'm fine, thank you," Nicholas said, settling into the chair across from her. Marcus sat beside his mother, and Nicholas could see the protective way he positioned himself, ready to support her if needed. "Mrs. Chun, I asked to meet with you because I wanted to discuss Marcus's future. I've been working with him for 3 weeks now, and I can tell you without hesitation that he has extraordinary talent." Lin's eyes filled with tears again. "He's always loved acting. Even when he was little, he would put on shows for me in the living room, but I've always worried, this business, it's so uncertain, and we can't afford for him to chase dreams that might not." "I understand your concerns completely," Nicholas said, "and I want to be honest with you. Acting is a difficult career, and there are no guarantees. But Marcus has something that can't be taught. He has authenticity, emotional intelligence, and the kind of work ethic that will serve him well in any field." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'd like to help him apply to some college theater programs. Good ones, with strong academic components as well. I have connections at several universities, and I think Marcus could be competitive for scholarships." Lin looked at her son, then back at Nicholas. "You would do that? But why?" "Because 30 years ago, someone did something similar for me. They saw potential and decided to invest in it. I can't repay that person, he's gone now, but I can pay it forward." Marcus reached over and took his mother's hand. "Mom, this could be my chance. Not just for acting, but for college. A real education, the kind you always wanted me to have." Lin was quiet for a long moment, tears streaming down her cheeks. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "When Marcus's father left, he said some terrible things. He said Marcus was wasting his time with his acting nonsense, that I was foolish to encourage him. He said we were both living in a fantasy world. She looked at her son with fierce love. But I've watched Marcus on those school stages, and I've seen something in him that his father never could. I've seen him light up when he performs, seen how naturally it comes to him. I've been so afraid that encouraging him would set him up for heartbreak. Mrs. Chun, Nicholas said softly, there are many ways to build a life around theater and acting. Teaching, directing, arts administration. Marcus is smart enough and dedicated enough to create opportunities for himself. And if he decides to pursue something else entirely, the skills he's learning, discipline, creativity, emotional intelligence, will serve him well in any field. Lynn nodded slowly. What would this involve? The college applications, I mean. I'd help him put together audition materials, monologues, scene work. I'd write letters of recommendation. I have friends at several universities who could give him honest assessments of his potential. Nicholas leaned forward slightly. I want to be clear. I'm not promising him admission anywhere, and I'm not offering to pay for his education. What I'm offering is guidance and advocacy, the chance for him to compete on a level playing field. I don't know what to say, Lynn whispered. This is more than I ever dared hope for him. Say you'll support his dreams, Nicholas replied. Say you'll trust in the remarkable young man you've raised. Lynn looked at Marcus, seeing not just her little boy but the man he was becoming. Of course I will. I always have. Marcus threw his arms around his mother, holding her tightly. Over his shoulder, Lynn mouthed, "Thank you," to Nicholas, who simply nodded in acknowledgement. The remaining 3 weeks of coaching flew by. Nicholas watched Marcus grow not just as an actor, but as a young man stepping into his own power. The boy's confidence bloomed, not in an arrogant way, but with the quiet assurance that comes from knowing you've worked hard and prepared well. They spent their final week preparing for the audition. Marcus had chosen 2 contrasting monologues, the Hamlet soliloquy that had brought them together, and a piece from Death of a Salesman that showcased his ability to find truth in a very different type of character. The night before the audition, Nicholas took Marcus out for dinner at the town's nicest restaurant, a small Italian place that had been serving the community for 40 years. As they sat across from each other, sharing a meal and talking about everything except the next day's audition, Nicholas felt a profound sense of satisfaction. Mr. Cage, Marcus said as they finished their dessert, I want you to know that no matter what happens tomorrow, these past 6 weeks have changed my life. Not just because of the coaching, but because someone I respect believed in me enough to invest this time and energy. Marcus, let me tell you something, Nicholas replied. These 6 weeks have been just as valuable for me. Working with you has reminded me why I fell in love with acting in the first place. You've taught me things about truth and authenticity that I'd forgotten after all these years in Hollywood. Marcus smiled, but Nicholas could see the nervousness flickering in his eyes. What if I mess up tomorrow? What if I freeze or forget my lines? Or, then you'll be human, Nicholas interrupted gently, and you'll handle it with the same grace and dignity you've shown in everything else. But Marcus, I don't think you're going to mess up. I think you're going to walk onto that stage and show Mrs. Patterson and everyone else exactly who you are, a gifted, dedicated, authentic actor who deserves this role. The next morning, Nicholas arrived at the theater early. Mrs. Patterson was there, along with several other adults he assumed were parents of auditioning students. The atmosphere was tense with anticipation and competitive energy. Marcus arrived exactly on time, wearing the same flannel shirt he'd worn that first day, but somehow he looked different, more confident, more centered. He nodded to Nicholas and took a seat in the back row, pulling out his script for a final review. Nicholas watched as the other auditions proceeded. The students were technically proficient, clearly well-trained, but something was missing. They were performing rather than being, hitting marks instead of finding truth. Finally, Mrs. Patterson called Marcus's name. The boy stood, took a deep breath, and walked onto the stage with quiet dignity. He took his position center stage, looked out at the small audience, and smiled. "I'll be performing two contrasting monologues this afternoon," he said clearly. "The first is Hamlet's To Be or Not to Be soliloquy, and the second is from Arthur Miller's Death of a Salesman." He closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself the way Nicholas had taught him. When he opened them and began to speak, the theater fell completely silent. To be or not to be, that is the question. Nicholas felt that familiar chill as Marcus inhabited the role completely. But this time, there was something even more powerful. 6 weeks of work and discovery, layer upon layer of understanding and technique, all in service of the fundamental truth that had drawn Nicholas to him in the first place. The boy's voice never wavered, his presence never faltered. He wasn't reciting Shakespeare's words. He was living Hamlet's thoughts, working through Hamlet's dilemma with the weight and gravity it deserved. When he finished the first monologue and transitioned to the second, Nicholas saw Mrs. Patterson lean forward in her seat. The other parents had stopped whispering among themselves and were watching with the kind of attention reserved for truly captivating performances. Marcus's interpretation of Biff Loman was completely different from his Hamlet. Rougher, more desperate, with an American working-class authenticity that was heartbreaking in its honesty. Here was a young man who understood disappointment, who knew what it meant to watch dreams crumble under the weight of economic reality. When he finished, the theater was silent for several heartbeats. Then Mrs. Patterson began to applaud, and the others joined in. It wasn't polite audition applause. It was genuine appreciation for something special they had just witnessed. "Thank you, Marcus," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been there 6 weeks earlier. "That was ... exceptional." Marcus nodded respectfully. "Thank you for the opportunity, Mrs. Patterson." As he left the stage, Nicholas felt a surge of pride unlike anything he'd experienced in his professional career. This wasn't about him. It was about watching a young artist step fully into his power and claim his place on the stage. The results were announced 2 days later. Marcus called Nicholas immediately, his voice thick with emotion. "I got it," he said simply. "I got Hamlet." "Of course you did," Nicholas replied, though his own voice was unsteady with pride and joy. "How do you feel?" "Grateful," Marcus said, "and terrified, and excited, and ... He paused. "Mostly grateful. To you, to Mom, to everyone who believed in me when I didn't quite believe in myself." Nicholas was scheduled to leave town the following week, but he made sure to attend the first rehearsal. Watching Marcus work with the other actors, seeing him take direction while maintaining his own artistic integrity, Nicholas knew he was witnessing the beginning of something special. After rehearsal, Marcus walked Nicholas to his car. The autumn air was crisp, and the leaves on the maple trees that lined the street were beginning to turn brilliant shades of red and gold. "Mr. Cage," Marcus said, "I have something for you." He reached into his backpack and pulled out his well-worn copy of Hamlet, the one filled with notes and insights from their weeks of work together. "I can't take this," Nicholas protested. "These are your notes, your discoveries." "Exactly," Marcus replied, "and I want you to have them. Maybe someday you'll work with another actor on this role, and something I learned might be useful. It would make me happy to know that our work together could help someone else." Nicholas accepted the book with hands that trembled slightly. He opened it to a random page and saw Marcus's neat handwriting in the margins. Questions, observations, connections to his own life and experiences. It was a treasure trove of an actor's journey from uncertainty to understanding. "I'll treasure this," Nicholas said sincerely. "And Marcus, I want you to stay in touch. Let me know how the performance goes, how college applications progress, how life unfolds. You're part of my story now, and I want to know how your story continues." They embraced then, not as mentor and student, but as two artists who had shared something meaningful and transformative. Nicholas left town the next morning, but he remained true to his word about helping Marcus with college applications. Over the following months, they exchanged emails and phone calls. Nicolas wrote recommendation letters that captured not just Marcus's talent, but his character, his work ethic, and his potential. The college auditions went well. Marcus was accepted to 3 excellent programs, including one with a full scholarship that would allow him to study theater without burdening his mother with debt. He chose a program that balanced practical training with academic rigor, exactly the kind of comprehensive education Lynn had always dreamed of for her son. The night before Marcus left for college, he performed his final show at the Riverside Community Theater. His Hamlet was a triumph, a performance that drew audiences from neighboring towns and earned a standing ovation every night of the run. Nicolas couldn't attend the final performance, but he sent a telegram that was read aloud during the curtain call. "Marcus, you have taken your first professional steps onto a stage that stretches far beyond this theater. Break a leg tonight, and remember, the world is waiting to hear your authentic voice." With admiration and pride, Nicolas Cage. Years passed. Marcus excelled in college, not just in theater, but in his academic subjects as well. He spent summers doing apprenticeships at professional theaters, gradually building a network of mentors and colleagues who recognized his talent and dedication. In his junior year, Marcus wrote a one-man show about his experience growing up in a small town, about the dreams that sustain us through difficult times, about the kindness of strangers who become family. The piece was selected for a national college theater festival where it won several awards and caught the attention of a prominent theater producer. Nicolas, who had been following Marcus's progress from afar, made a special trip to see the show. Sitting in the audience, watching the young man he'd met 4 years earlier command the stage with power and grace, Nicolas felt a profound sense of completion. After the performance, they met in the lobby of the theater. Marcus had grown taller, more confident, but his essential qualities, his humility, his kindness, his authenticity, remained unchanged. "Mr. Cage," Marcus said, embracing his old mentor warmly, "I can't believe you came." "I wouldn't have missed it," Nicolas replied. "That was extraordinary, Marcus. You found your voice as an artist, and it's even more powerful than I imagined it could be. I couldn't have done any of this without that day you walked into our little theater," Marcus said. "Everything that's happened since then traces back to that moment when you decided to take a chance on some random kid." Nicolas shook his head. "You're wrong about that. Everything that's happened since then traces back to your decision to keep auditioning, to keep working, to keep believing in yourself despite the rejections. I just helped you see what was already there." They spent the evening talking about Marcus's future plans, his hopes for a professional career, his continued commitment to using his platform to help other young artists find their way. Nicolas listened with pride as this remarkable young man outlined his vision for a life dedicated to art, service, and authentic expression. As the evening wound down, Marcus pulled out a small wrapped package. "I have something for you," he said. "It's not much, but—" Nicolas unwrapped it to find a program from that long-ago production of Hamlet at the Riverside Community Theater. But this one was different. It was signed by the entire cast and crew with personal messages of gratitude to the mystery mentor who helped our friend achieve his dream. "I never told them who you were," Marcus explained. "I just said a friend had helped me prepare. But they all wanted to thank you for the gift you gave to our whole production." Nicolas felt tears well up in his eyes as he read the heartfelt messages from these young people he'd never met, who had been touched by his investment in one of their peers. "There's one more thing," Marcus said quietly. He opened his backpack and pulled out a pristine copy of Hamlet, a beautiful hardcover edition. "I bought this with money from my first professional acting job. I was hoping you'd sign it for me." Nicolas took the book with trembling hands. On the title page he wrote, "To Marcus, thank you for reminding me why we do this work. Your authenticity, your dedication, and your heart have made me a better actor and a better man. The stage is waiting for you to light it up. With love and admiration, Nicolas Cage." As Marcus read the inscription, Nicolas saw tears in the young man's eyes. "I'll treasure this always," Marcus whispered. 10 years later, Marcus Chun had become an established actor with credits on Broadway, in regional theaters across the country, and in several critically acclaimed independent films. But more than that, he had become exactly the kind of artist Nicolas had hoped he would be, someone who used his talent not just for personal success, but to elevate the entire community around him. Marcus started a scholarship fund for young actors from disadvantaged backgrounds. He returned regularly to his hometown to teach workshops and mentor high school students. He never forgot where he came from or the people who had believed in him. Nicolas, now in his 70s, continued to work but had begun to think more about legacy, not just the films he'd made, but the lives he'd touched, the artists he'd helped nurture. When he received an invitation to Marcus's wedding, he knew immediately that he would attend. The ceremony was held in the same small town where they'd first met, in a beautiful old church that had served the community for over a century. Lin Chun, now retired and glowing with pride, walked her son down the aisle. Marcus's bride, Sarah, was a fellow actor he'd met during a summer theater festival, a talented, kind woman who clearly understood and supported his commitment to his craft and his community. At the reception, Nicolas was seated at the head table, treated like family by people who barely knew him but understood the role he'd played in Marcus's journey. During the toasts, Marcus stood and spoke about the people who had shaped his life, his mother's sacrifice, his teacher's guidance, his friends' support. "But there's one person here tonight," Marcus said, his voice carrying clearly across the reception hall, "who changed the entire trajectory of my life with a single act of kindness." 15 years ago, Nicolas Cage walked into our little community theater and saw something in a nervous 16-year-old that the kid couldn't see in himself. The room fell silent as Marcus turned toward Nicolas. "He didn't just teach me about acting. He taught me about integrity, about using whatever gifts you have to lift up others, about the responsibility that comes with success. Every role I've played, every student I've taught, every young artist I've tried to help, it all flows from that moment when he chose to invest in a stranger's dreams." Marcus raised his glass. "To Nicolas Cage, the man who taught me that the greatest performance is the one you give in life, when you choose to see the best in people and help them see it in themselves." The toast was echoed throughout the room, and Nicolas felt overwhelmed by the love and gratitude surrounding him. This wasn't about his fame or his career. It was about something more fundamental, more lasting. Later that evening, as the reception was winding down, Nicolas found himself in the church garden with Marcus and Lynn. The three of them sat on a bench beneath an old oak tree, watching the stars emerge in the clear autumn sky. "You know," Nicolas said softly, "people often ask me what I'm most proud of in my career. They expect me to mention a particular film or award. But the truth is, I'm most proud of this, of watching you become the man you are, of seeing the ripple effects of one decision to take a chance on someone." Lynn reached over and squeezed his hand. "You saved my boy's life," she said simply. "Not in a dramatic way, but in the most important way, you saved his dreams." "No," Nicolas replied, looking at Marcus with deep affection. "He saved his own dreams. I just helped him realize they were worth saving." As the evening ended and they prepared to say their goodbyes, Marcus pulled Nicolas aside one final time. "I need you to know something," he said. "Every time I step onto a stage, every time I work with a young actor, every time I have the chance to help someone else pursue their dreams, I carry you with me. Not just the lessons you taught me about acting, but the lesson you taught me about what it means to be a human being." Nicolas embraced the young man he'd watched grow into an exceptional artist and person. "And I need you to know that meeting you, working with you, watching you flourish, it's been one of the greatest privileges of my life." As Nicolas drove away from the reception, he reflected on the unexpected turns life can take. He'd walked into that small theater on a whim, with no particular agenda beyond killing a few hours during a flight delay. But that random decision had led to one of the most meaningful relationships of his life. He thought about all the other talented young people out there, in small towns and big cities, in community theaters and school auditoriums, in coffee shops and hardware stores, waiting for someone to see their potential and help them believe in themselves. He thought about the responsibility that comes with success, the obligation to pay forward the kindness and support he'd received throughout his own career. The next morning, Nicolas made a series of phone calls. He reached out to his agent, his publicist, and several theater contacts. By the end of the week, he had established the Authentic Voice Foundation, an organization dedicated to providing mentorship and opportunities for young actors from underserved communities. The foundation's first scholarship recipient was a 17-year-old girl from Marcus's hometown, a talented young woman who had been inspired by his story and was now preparing for her own college auditions. And so the cycle continued, one act of kindness rippling outward to create new possibilities, new dreams, new chances for authentic voices to be heard. Years later, when Nicolas looked back on his long and varied career, he would remember many things: the excitement of early successes, the learning that came from failures, the satisfaction of working with talented directors and fellow actors. But what he remembered most clearly, what filled him with the deepest sense of purpose and pride, was a 16-year-old boy standing alone on a small-town stage, speaking Shakespeare's words with such truth and vulnerability that they seemed to have been written just for him. That boy had grown into a man who used his gifts not just for personal fulfillment, but to create opportunities for others. The investment Nicolas had made in one young person had multiplied exponentially, touching hundreds of other lives in ways that would continue to ripple outward for generations to come. And isn't that, perhaps, the most authentic performance of all, the one we give when we choose to see potential in others and help them discover their own authentic voice? When we decide that success isn't just about what we achieve, but about what we inspire others to achieve. The story of Nicolas Cage and Marcus Chun reminds us that sometimes the most profound moments in our lives come not from grand gestures or planned events, but from simple acts of recognition and kindness. Sometimes, all it takes is for one person to see something special in another and to say, "Yes, you have something worth sharing with the world." In a business often criticized for its superficiality and selfishness, their story stands as a testament to the power of authenticity, mentorship, and genuine human connection. It reminds us that true success isn't measured only in box office receipts or critical acclaim, but in the lives we touch, the dreams we help nurture, and the authentic voices we help find their way to the stage. Never underestimate the power of believing in someone. Never underestimate the impact of taking a chance on a stranger. Never underestimate the importance of helping others discover their authentic voice. The person you help today might change the world tomorrow, and in helping them, you might discover something profound about yourself. Sometimes the greatest performances happen not in front of cameras or audiences, but in the quiet moments when we choose to invest in another person's potential. Sometimes, the most important role we'll ever play is that of a mentor, a guide, a believer in someone else's dreams. That's a story worth remembering, worth sharing, and worth living. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories, and share your own experiences in the comments below. Have you ever had someone believe in you when you didn't believe in yourself? Have you ever taken a chance on someone else's dreams? Your story might inspire someone else to take that leap of faith, to offer that helping hand, to be the person who changes someone's life forever. Remember, we all have the power to be someone's Nicolas Cage, to see potential where others see limitations, to offer opportunity where others see obstacles, to believe in authentic voices that are waiting to be heard. The world needs more stories like this one. And it starts with each of us choosing to pay attention, to care, and to act when we encounter extraordinary potential in unexpected places. Thank you for watching. And remember, The greatest performance of your life might be the one you give when nobody's watching, when you choose to lift someone else up and help them find their authentic voice.